Hello everybody and welcome to Insider's Guide. Today we're wrapping up our discussion of Squaw Valley's overlooked little brother, Alpine Meadows. With Alpine Meadows there's a lot to talk about, so this episode is split into two parts. For this part, we'll cover the resort's infamous Sherwood and Summit areas. If you haven't already, go check out part A to get some valuable context to a lot of what I'll say. So with that, let's finish an Insider's Guide to Alpine Meadows. We'll pick it up where we left off on the backside trail map and begin with Sherwood, a pod I'm really mixed about. On the one hand, it offers some excellent intermediate and advanced bowl and tree riding. On the other hand, it faces dead south, so conditions here can get brutal at times. In addition, the high-speed lift does attract a decent amount of crowding. Sherwood, in my opinion, is best enjoyed on overcast powder days. There are two ways to get here, via Ray's Rut from Lakeview and via Treeline Cirque. As you might be able to infer from its depiction on the trail map, Ray's is a royal pain. TLC drops you off in the heart of the pod, so I would highly recommend that. These three intermediate runs are similar to the Sundown Bowl at Vail in that they, rather counterintuitively, start off gladed at the top and open into a bowl as you get farther down. Usually at least Sherwood Face is groomed, while the rest of these Robin Hood themed runs are on rotational grooming. Sherwood Face refers to the bowl area directly under the lift. It's very wide open, although it does feature a few gullies here and there. In addition, the trees in between these marked runs are, in my opinion, the best intermediate tree skiing across both mountains of Cliffs Tahoe. The trees have a very unique feel, and because they block out the sunlight, they can hold some really good snow even when the rest of Sherwood has been baked. Finally, via this south face access road you can access two gullies, east and west. They are very similar but are both quite steep and decently long. The rest of this backside terrain is actually accessed off the summit lift, so we'll discuss it later in this video. For intermediates, the best way to exit Sherwood is via Return Road, which we discussed in Part A, wherein we also discussed some of the other fun things Sherwood gives access to. Alright, now we get to the lift that most of you watching this episode have been waiting for, the infamous Summit Lift, also known locally as Summit 6. Summit 6 serves an absolutely ridiculous amount of terrain that in itself could take several seasons to fully explore. As such, it makes sense that this is the lift that generates by far the longest lines on the mountain. There's terrain for all riders intermediate and above, but I definitely recommend being an advanced intermediate to ski any of the Summit Blues. In general, the terrain served by Summit 6 can be divided into three distinct sections: Looker's Right, Looker's Left, and the backside. We'll discuss these areas in that order. Before we get into that, though, let's briefly discuss the Alpine Bowl Double. This lift still runs on a semi-regular basis, and if you're looking to ski any of the terrain from the Palisades to High Yellow Gully, I would recommend taking Alpine Bowl instead of Summit, as it rarely sees lines. It also means you don't have to ski all the way back down to the base, although do note that it takes a bit of flat catwalking to reach this bottom terminal from any of the runs Lookers left of High Yellow Face. On days when Summit has exceptionally long lines, riding either Treeline Cirque or Roundhouse, whichever has shorter lines, and then heading to Alpine Bowl is an effective alternative. With all that out of the way, let's begin our discussion of this absolutely monstrous pod. As previously mentioned, the frontside runs serviced by Summit 6 can be divided into two segments separated by Peril Ridge. We'll be talking about all of this terrain Looker's Right of Peril Ridge first. The D-chutes are a series of 4 short lines found off this ridge. I generally find that they get steeper as you travel further down the ridge. D5, D6, and D7 are wide open chutes, while D8 is a very steep tree-defined groomer that's easily my favorite cruiser on the mountain. In between D7 and D8 is a very extreme narrow couloir that requires a mandatory drop in low tide conditions. This is much harder than the remaining D-chutes, and the landing is quite flat, so make sure to carry some speed. Beyond D8 you have North Peril, which consists of some steep trees that do admittedly get skied out pretty quickly. The marquee run on the right side of Summit 6 is Wolverine Bowl, a steep, wide open area akin to Siberia Bowl on the Palisades side. Like Siberia, most of Wolverine Bowl is left ungroomed, however, they usually do groom a strip down the heart of the bowl. Below Wolverine Bowl you have a few options. You can continue down the blue portion of Wolverine, which wraps around and filters into the Roundhouse pod. On the other hand, you can ski the lift line of Summit 6, which is known as the Face. The Face is a steep, albeit short, mogul run that even has a few cliffs during low tide. My favorite approach is to ski the Face and then cut skiers right into Face cliffs. Contrary to the name, this is a short but very narrow chute that should probably be rated double black. Finally, from the bottom of Wolverine Bowl, cut skiers left into the trees to access Waterfall. Waterfall can get a touch icy at times, but it's a very fun and steep natural halfpipe. In lower conditions, it can ski a little bit more like a chute, but it's still far from the hardest run around. When not skiing face cliffs, I love Waterfall instead. The remaining runs beyond Wolverine Saddle require a bit of hiking and traversing to reach, but it's absolutely worth it. For reference, it takes about 15 minutes to reach the top of Idiot's Delight and Beaver Bowl, and about 25 to reach Estelle. However, don't let the ease of access fool you. This terrain is very serious. These runs are highly avalanche prone and often take even longer to reopen after storm days than the rest of the Summit 6 terrain. Idiot's Delight, as the name implies, is an insane area home to some of the craziest lines on the mountain. Every line here requires a very steep cornice drop into narrow rock-lined chutes. Some of the most extreme lines here require prolonged straight landing into Wolverine Bowl, where there are often people, moguls, and other obstacles. A bit beyond Idiot's Delight is Beaver Bowl, which is similarly very steep, but not quite as extreme. If you traverse all the way across Wolverine Bowl, you can access South Beaver, which is the mildest entrance into Beaver Bowl. I'd only recommend this if the Hike 2 terrain has been closed and you're on the hunt for some fresh snow, as the lines from the top of the ridge are way more unique. Directly below South Beaver are the Sisters. They're quite steep and can be dicey in the early season when they haven't been entirely filled in. All of the Beaver Bowl terrain will filter down into the Kangaroo Pod unless you cut skiers right early to ski the Sisters. Past Beaver Bowl is Estelle Bowl, which is home to similarly gnarly lines. There is a ton of good stuff hidden back here, including an infamous feature known as the Castle. The Castle isn't shown on the trail map here, so we've instead linked an article in the description that covers not just that, but this entire area in more detail. Beyond Estelle, there are many more features you can find as the terrain gets progressively more backcountry-esque. From the bottom of Estelle and the other runs, make sure to cut skiers right back towards the Kangaroo Chair, as all terrain beyond it will drop you below the base and require some catwalking to return to the lifts. Moving back up to the top of the lift, the upper part of this ridge is considered a part of Sunspot and is therefore always groomed. It transitions into Peril Ridge past D8 and becomes much more technical. This part of the trail map is really poorly depicted, but if you don't want to continue down Peril Ridge, you can take the remainder of the Sunspot Trail, which leads into the heart of Alpine Bowl. Peril Ridge itself is steep, narrow, and often quite rocky. If you continue down the ridge, you'll eventually find yourself on Pete's Peril, a very steep triangular face. There is a chute that goes right through the gut of the face that is much more tight and technical than the rest of it. If Pete's is too challenging, you can always bail onto North Peril and the trees adjacent, which are still steep but not quite as technical. Back up top, we now get to discuss the most iconic run arguably in all of Alpine Meadows, Alpine Bowl. This is an excellent wide open cruiser with a really consistent pitch all the way to the bottom. While it is admittedly on the shorter side, Alpine Bowl is quite steep for a blue run, so I'd really only recommend this to advanced intermediates. Sunspot is a much easier alternative, so I'd recommend utilizing that trail if Alpine Bowl is intimidating for you. It's easily scoutable from the lift. Both runs filter onto Rock Garden, from which you'll stay skiers left to return to Summit and Roundhouse, or stay skiers right to go to the Treeline Cirque side. You can hike to the summit of Ward Peak to ski this top Alpine Bowl trail, but I don't really find it to be worth the effort. Now, as I mentioned earlier, all of this terrain from Palisades to High Yellow Gully is technically also lappable via the Alpine Bowl chair, which I'd recommend using if Summit 6 has an unbearably long line. Pygmy Forest is a gladed area located in between the Alpine Bowl chair and this marked single black, the Palisades. I usually opt to traverse past this to access a series of 2 rock-lined chutes named East and West Palisades respectively. Do note that all 3 of these runs require a bit of sidestepping and traversing to reach, regardless of which lift you take. Upper Saddle is the broad, open section located just above the Palisades. If you continue beyond the Palisades, you'll reach the lower half of Keyhole, which consists of several rockier chutes. This is a great way to reach some fun expert terrain even when the top of Keyhole is closed, which is why it's easily my favorite zone to lap across both mountains during the early season. However, if it's open, I do recommend the 10-minute hike to the top of Keyhole via the High Traverse. Keyhole is right up there with the Castle, Buttress, and Idiot's Delight as being one of the hardest zones on the mountain. This area is really not done justice by the map, as there are so many different rock-lined chutes and couloirs you have access to. The main run here is, of course, Keyhole, which is what you're seeing here. There are several alternatives to Keyhole proper that are all vaguely marked as Keyhole slopes. Towards the looker's left part of the zone, you'll come across two lines that are significantly harder than Keyhole and Keyhole slopes. Marhankins is a super steep and narrow corridor that in most cases requires a prolonged straight line. The next is NC, which stands for a vulgar name that I definitely can't say on YouTube. It's an absolutely insane line, being barely wide enough for a single skier to squeeze through. This chute is only open during the very best snow years and is a strong contender for the scariest line on the mountain. There are, of course, a plethora of other unmarked chutes and cliffs in this wider Keyhole area, but I will leave those for you to explore. One thing to note is that Keyhole is particularly avalanche prone, so this terrain often won't open until March. Regardless, if you intend to ski it, you'll want to come in peak season, which we discussed in episode 46A. From Keyhole, the ridge starts sloping downwards and can be sharky in the early season. Lower Saddle is a wide open bowl area in between the Keyhole and High Yellow runs. I don't really find it to be worth the hike. I prefer continuing down the ridge and skiing either High Yellow Face or, my preferred run, High Yellow Gully. High Yellow Face is pretty much exactly what you'd expect, a very steep face that often holds some great snow. High Yellow Gully is an excellent couloir that skis beautifully throughout pretty much the entire season. As we mentioned in part A, you can take the Our Father traverse into the middle of the couloir, but there's nothing quite like skiing it from the very top. This is easily one of the best lines on the mountain. Let's now discuss some runs on the backside that are exclusively serviced by the Summit and Alpine Bowl chairs. Note that all of the terrain I'm about to talk about requires that 5-minute hike up the high traverse to access. As you can see on this backside map, this terrain is vast and wide open. In all honesty, I rarely traverse all the way out here because I don't find the terrain worth the effort. Call me lazy if you will. In addition, as basically an extension of Sherwood, this area is south-facing and thus gets badly sunbaked. That being said, on some days, this is a great place to get some untracked lines, assuming the summit lift is open. Overall, however, most people will be plenty satisfied with the bowl terrain on the front side. All of this terrain, for the most part, is very wide open at the top and lightly graded towards the bottom. There's a cornice drop-in present throughout this entire ridge. The drop-ins in general get progressively steeper as you continue down the ridge. Some notable runs to discuss include the following. CB Chute is a very wide gully and honestly doesn't ski much like a tight chute. Grouse Saddle and Grouse Rock are where this bowl starts to curve. They have a more favorable sun aspect than others back here, and are also significantly steeper. That, along with the sheer effort required to make it out here, allows the snow to pretty much always be fresh. In all honesty though, this is another one of those zones that's better for you to explore than for me to describe in great detail. Switching back to the Frontside trail map, while most people don't take multiple laps on the summit backside terrain because of the effort required to reach it, if you do plan to lap it, here's the most optimal flow. Take the high traverse, ride the ridge to the run of your choosing, ski down to Sherwood, ride that lift up, ride down Counterweight Gully to the Alpine Bowl lift and take it up. Many people just automatically go to Summit 6, but I'd recommend using Alpine Bowl unless it isn't spinning. Alright, that about wraps it up for Alpine Meadows. If you haven't already, go check out part A to hear about the rest of the mountain. Or, go check out another episode of Insider's Guide, all about other fine resorts around the world. As always, please leave any questions down below. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please consider subscribing to help support this stream. Thank you all so much for watching. All my love, I'm out.